I welcome that. I think it's a big gamble by Hamas. I mean, this entire negotiations is basically putting Palestinians the barrel of a gun to their head and saying subject, surrender, or in the settlement process, relinquish governing authority. They have already said that they
But why should they keep their arms, though?
Gaza
That's
Strip.
the point.
That's not enough.
But why keep their arms?
Wait, why would they give up their arms without, hold on, why would they give up their arms without any sort of assurance for national statehood or sovereignty? Why would they do that, Piers? Why would you give up a right, a legally enshrined right to armed resistance to an illegal besiegement and occupation without any sort of assurances or promises of statehood?
Well, again, I'll come to Jonathan, and I will come to you, Jonathan, but I would argue that when you commit a terrorist act of that magnitude, then you abrogate all your rights to demand anything. And the Israeli government position...
Okay, so why is the logic not applied to the IDF?
Well, I'll come to Jonathan for that question in a moment, but I'm just curious why you would think that Hamas has any rights about any of this. I mean, surely when you do what they did on October the 7th 2 years ago, in that moment, you surrender your right to anything. You can ask for it, but you don't have any rights left. I mean, you're basically saying, we are a despicable terror group, we're committing this outrage, and we're going to kidnap and kill and maim and do all the rest of it, but at the end of it, we want rights to demand things. That's not really how it works with terror groups.
Well, that's exactly what Israel's doing. For the last 2 years, we've been seeing the most bloody genocide on steroids. This is Israel for who it is. This is their true nature and character. So why on earth do they get the right to make concessions? They are a rogue maniac state, killing all of their neighbors, bombing all of their neighbors. They need to be stopped. They need to be stopped. Why do they have any rights to demand concessions for the victims of the genocide that they're perpetrating, Piers?
Okay.
Why?
All right. Well, let me ask Jonathan why.
Question, Piers, that you're asking me?
Well, I think it's an interesting flip question to the one I asked, which I didn't really get a satisfactory response to, which is that actually, to me, Hamas have no right to demand anything here. And clearly, the Netanyahu government position is that we will carry on pulverizing Gaza until the last Hamas terrorist is left dead in the ground, as long as that takes, and everybody is intent on trying to stop that happening because of the collateral damage to so many civilians and so much property and so on. But of course, the flip side is the argument comes back, well, prior to October the 7th, and since October the 7th in particular, the Israeli government, many people on the Palestinian side believe, have behaved like a rogue terror state themselves. So what right do they have to determine what happens here afterwards?
Yeah, I regret the parody. I think it's a totally false, dishonest, actually it's an absurd parody that is being made here. And I think it's very interesting to hear that, you know, even countries like Qatar, Turkey, Egypt, Pakistan, and a few other Muslim majority countries who have no long record of loving Israel or publishing positive statements or things that can be aligned with Israeli security interests, they are behind this initiative and they are saying Hamas has no right to hold weapons, Hamas must be disarmed, Hamas should not govern the Gaza Strip, and Hamas must return all of the hostages. They're also asking, of course, demanding that Israel withdraw from the Gaza Strip and that there will be a pathway to a Palestinian state. And, you know, for most people who are normal and not consumed by Jew hatred and this feverish anger and hatred towards those annoying Jews who have their homeland in Israel, for most people who are sane, that makes sense. And it makes sense for Israel to actually dictate the terms against Hamas. It makes sense for Israel to defend itself, not only against October 7, but against an organization that has both written and said multiple times before October 7, during and after October 7, that it is their outspoken goal and intention to annihilate the Jewish state. So for me, there's really no question what needs to happen here. This war cannot and must not end without a defeated Hamas, without Hamas that is completely dismantled of its military capabilities, and without a fresh start for people in Gaza. And I think that those are the very basic prerequisites. We'll have to see now if Hamas, how clever they'll be able to be. And I think they maneuvered diplomatically pretty well. They said that they're going to return hostages. Teams are now in place in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, and they're going to start discussing the details. But the Israeli and American and actually Qatari condition is first hand over all the hostages, dead and murdered, and then we start negotiating on all of the long and very substantial list of the 21 points that remain. I hope that Hamas will do it. I hope that Hamas will be true to their words for once. I hope that they will return the hostages, those that they murdered and those that are still in captivity more than 2 years, suffering, starving, abused and everything. And I hope that they will be returned to their families. And then we can start looking at the withdrawal of Israeli forces, stopping military operations, and perhaps building a different Gaza. If you ask me if that's going to happen, what the chances are, we unfortunately have our experience and we know that Hamas, they lie, they are deceitful, they're extremely cruel, and they will do everything they can to stay in power at the expense of the population in Gaza, at the expense of Palestinians. But I hope that for once in their short history, Hamas will do what's good for Gazans and not for the Muslim Brotherhood and not for Hamas itself. But we'll have to wait and see.
Abby, you were laughing a little inappropriately as he was talking about Hamas's need to release the hostages. Why would that be something that makes you laugh? I mean, surely that should be a prerequisite.
Oh, no, I wasn't laughing at that. No, Look, of course I want all hostages, both Palestinian and Israeli hostages, to be released. I wasn't laughing at that. I was laughing at the audacity of Jonathan to just gaslight and lie and project everything that Israelis are doing onto Hamas and onto Palestinians. The audacity to look at Gaza today, which is completely demolished. We just saw the finance minister saying the demolition's done. Now the real estate bonanza begins. Netanyahu has said, bragging over and over again, we're not going to withdraw. You think we're going to withdraw? It's a joke, Jonathan. The world knows you are lying. You have lost the plot. You know who can't come home? The 17,000 children that Israelis have slaughtered. So all of this is it's just absolutely insane that 2 years into this, we all know that you're committing genocide. The only people who won't accept that it's a genocide are Israelis. And you know what? I think that you know it's a genocide, Jonathan. I think you just support it. You want the genocide.
Abby, let me just jump in there. On this issue of genocide, you are aware that no country has ever been found guilty of actual genocide, are you?
Europe River Cruising, 15 days.
What point is this question?
That even in Rwanda,
what is the point of that question? We know
it was determined that the legal threshold for a genocide was not met. Every single genocide
scholar, even though, so
my point is that
you're looking at Gaza today and you're saying that you've agreed that it's a genocide, Piers.
No, I've never agreed that. I've said that I believe what has been going on.
Sure.
No, because simply for the reason I've just stated, there has never been a legally determined genocide declared.
Okay, let's get him to court. Let's go to court with Israel.
That's what I think.
Let's see the evidence.
That's what I think would be sensible, right? I think it would be sensible to do that and actually get a legal ruling about whether it constitutes genocide. I believe the Israeli government.
I would welcome that, Piers, by the way.
And Jonathan and I have discussed this. I just think that it gets thrown around all the time, and people get attacked for not saying it's a genocide. I get stopped by people in the street, call it a genocide. To me, what has gone on has become an increasingly massively disproportionate response to the terror attack 2 years ago.
92% civilians killed. 92% civilians have been killed, Piers. That is unprecedented in any modern conflict.
Well, we don't know the exact numbers.
False.
The numbers that I've read are that approaching 25 to 30,000 of the 60 or so thousand who've been killed are Hamas. But here's my point about that. We don't actually know. Because actually, the refusal by the Israeli government, and Jonathan, I know, agrees with me on this point, the refusal to allow international journalists into Gaza to verify this stuff is one of the biggest problems of this war.
Piers, I think we should address something, on the topic of numbers and, these big, important, historically loaded terms like genocide, like apartheid, like famine. Let's revisit, and I think that there's people who have been claiming and saying that there's famine in Gaza. Famine was declared by the IPC, I believe, on August 22nd. Now, A friend of mine has done the numbers on it, and I think it's important to be specific here because there are definitions, and when you say famine, that means something. When a UN organization claims that there's famine somewhere, that's supposed to be backed up by data and by reality. Now, according to the numbers and statistics and the globally accustomed numbers of the IPC, which they follow, they issued a declaration that on August 22nd, there's famine in certain parts of Gaza. By their own numbers of level 4 and 5, emergency and famine, there should have been 9,500 dead Palestinians by malnutrition, not natural deaths, not combat, not pre-existing conditions, 9,500 dead Palestinians since August 22nd. You know how many there really have been? According to Hamas numbers, 191. That's 98% off. Now, I challenge you and I challenge everybody who have been screaming and were part of the starvation campaign and the famine, all of the other nonsense that we heard with UN regalia attached to it. At the end of the day, it's a fake. It's lies. It is not supported by reality. It's make-believe, and it is propaganda against Israel that useful idiots who have no bearing on the situation on the ground are parroting just because it is a weapon
but you
against
wouldn't dispute,
Israel.
Jonathan.
It is untrue.
But Jonathan,
it is not factual.
Okay,
we
but hang on,
can
hang
see
on,
the photos, right?
Hang on, but Jonathan, you wouldn't dispute that there was a near 3-month blockade of substantial amounts of food and aid. I mean, that was indisputable. That happened.
8 months where not a lot was coming in, yes.
Right. But
that's true. But the important part, Piers, but the important part is what was the result? The important part is, okay, that was done by Israel and it was said by Israeli leadership. It was challenged by the defense establishment and there were a lot of internal discussions. But at the end of the day, when UN-affiliated organizations declared famine and every journalist, editor, media personality and talking heads repeated that as if that was gospel, nobody looks at the numbers. And even today, a month and a half after that, is anybody held accountable for these libelous, false, grotesque claims?
Well, why
Isn't
don't we,
it supposed to mean something
why
when
don't we
you say
agree? Why don't
that
we
there's a
agree?
famine
Okay,
and
so why don't we?
nobody's
Abby, I will
died?
come to you. So why don't we agree? Rather like with genocide, right? I have believed that the rhetoric coming out of Smodrich and Ben Gvir in particular has made it clear there's been a policy by large sections of this government of ethnic cleansing. They would like to see all the Palestinians gone from Gaza and preferably the West Bank too. Thankfully, in this new plan, that is no longer apparently something that will be sustained by the American government, which means it probably won't happen. But let's not pretend they weren't talking about that openly. And in relation to famine, okay, let's just say there was a deliberate policy for nearly 12 weeks of starving Palestinians, and that some of them starved to death. I mean,
there wasn't a policy of starving Palestinians. There was a policy of not providing the
in other words, I think these words, in a way...
We've spoken about this.
But hang on,
Piers,
let me finish.
We have spoken about this.
We
and
have.
But you've addressed this, really, and we've spoken about it in the past. There was indeed an Israeli policy. And by the way, I reject and I criticize and I do not accept the statements made by Smotrich and Ben Gvir. I think that they are disgusting. I think that they are not representative of Israel. I think that they are fringe. I know we've had this discussion before. He's a minister in cabinet, etc. But I think that they do not represent the majority of Israel. And most importantly, they are not implemented on the ground by the IDF. And amongst the three of us, actually the one who knows what the IDF is doing and what the IDF isn't doing and what goes on in internal deliberations in Israel, I actually have access to that, and I can say, and that's one of the reasons why I am here and I speak about it publicly, is yes, there have been horrible, unethical calls by Israeli ministers that should be condemned. I condemn it. Most Israelis do, and they do not reflect what Israelis believe should be done. Is there a will for revenge against Palestinians for what they have been doing and what they did on October 7? Definitely yes. But that is not what the IDF has been doing. The IDF has been fighting Hamas and they have been applying military force proportionately according to military necessity against military targets.
All right,
that is what the IDF has been doing.
Okay.
And if we're honest, last sentence, yes, I know I'm speaking longly, last sentence, Israel is the only country that has been forced to provide food and fuel to its enemy. If you can give me any other example in modern history of a combating side that is
Jonathan.
forced to
It's the
feed.
law. When you're illegally besieging
No, it's not the law. It's not the law that you feed your enemy.
Right. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
No, it is not the law. It is not the law. It is not the law.
Hang on. I'll let Jonathan, you have a good long stretch
Jonathan,
there.
you've been talking
Let
endlessly.
Abby now respond without interrupting her. Abby.
What's the problem?
Jonathan, first of all,
just to be clear.
Okay, of course, because you've just been droning on and on with the most outrageous propaganda possible, basically saying, oh, they say that this many kids died of starvation, but really, that's a lie. We've seen the photos, Jonathan. It's skin and bones. It's like concentration camp victims coming out of the Holocaust. Do you know that we see this? I know that Israel's like to control the narrative with the billions of dollars with Hasbro propaganda, but we see the photos of starving children. We see doctors' testimonies saying baby formula was seized out of their bags. Baby formula. Why are you punishing babies? We know what the situation on the ground. Peanut butter was told to doctors that it was a luxury and stolen out of their bags, Jonathan. For the last 2 years, we've been told, not even talking about the siege before where calories were counted, given to Palestinians before October 7th, but just since October 7th, we've been told that there's no siege, there's no famine, that aid is not being prevented from being delivered, right? Well, we just saw an entire naval fleet blockade, committed an act of piracy and kidnapping of 500 activists illegally in international waters that were trying to bring baby formula and food to starving Palestinians. We've seen a mercenary force unload a barrage of bullets and kill more Palestinians begging for bread than civilians died on October 7th. So while people like you, these hand-picked spokespeople with American or Swedish accents, come and speak to Western audiences and placate us and tell us lies, we know what Israeli society thinks and believes, Jonathan. We see the news. I see Israeli Channel 12. I see the IDF reports. Of course I do. I see them coming out saying, guess what? Everyone left in Gaza City, the 250,000 people left, are going to be treated as terrorists and killed. Jonathan, I just let you speak forever. Jonathan, let me finish. Jonathan, let me finish.
So either stop saying my name.
You will be remembered no differently than the officers of the Third Reich. You will be remembered no differently than the officers of the Third Reich. You will be remembered in the dustbin of history.
I know you rehearsed that line. I'm sure you rehearsed that line, but it's really pitiful. Come on, you can do better. You're a smart woman. You can do better. You've written books. You've narrated movies. You could do better. And I'm a bit insulted that is what you've come up with against me. Really?
Well, what's your response to the rest of what I said, Jonathan? So you don't want to be compared to a Nazi officer.
I'll gladly tell you.
Why would you compare
in the beginning?
Abby, let me just jump in there.
I mean, you're so out of bounds.
Hang on, Jonathan. Abby, out of interest, why would you think that anybody watching this, when they hear you tell a Jewish man that he's basically a Nazi,
the grandchild of a Holocaust survivor, by the way, whose grandfather's family was murdered.
That is a winning point to me. Why would you not think in that moment, a lot of viewers go, what the hell are you talking about? Why would you be so offensive?
Well, it's not offensive at all. It's not offensive at all. If you want to not be compared to Nazis, stop acting like Nazis. It's very simple. Stop doing what Nazis did and stop treating Palestinians like Jews in concentration camps, Jonathan.
You are in your little eco bubble. I think you're consumed by hatred.
No, you are, my friend. The world has woken up, my friend. The world has woken up. No one believes your lies anymore.
No, it hasn't.
You're pathetic.
And I don't think that we're friends.
Propagandist.
I don't think that we're friends.
You're an absolutely pathetic propagandist, and no one believes you.
When you in the beginning, when Pierce gave you a long lifeline.
Israel's on a shelf life, my friend. Zionism has a shelf life.
He asked you, why does Hamas have your legitimacy in your eyes? Why should Hamas even hold weapons? And you fumbled and stumbled and you couldn't bring yourself to say, well, actually, no, Hamas shouldn't have weapons because they're bloody heinous terrorists. That's the response that I would,
I think
it makes
Israel
sense for a person like you to say.
Jonathan.
But you couldn't bring yourself to say it. Why? Because you sympathize with them.
Of course, I'm not going to say it.
Because you believe that their resistance is legitimate. You believe, I'm sure, that Israel is very annoying and that we shouldn't exist where we are.
I believe in the law.
Yeah, no, you don't believe in the law. You don't believe in the law. You believe that we don't have a right to exist in our homeland.
I've seen your movies.
I've read some parts of your books. I've seen what you've done in Gaza. You've been
Okay.
propagating for Hamas.
Israel should